Welcome to Billy's Books. I'm going to review The Shining. Since it's summer, I'm reading about cold things. In the winter, I read about warm places as a general rule. So The Shining, as you know, was a very famous Stanley Kubrick movie, but of course it was a book by Stephen King. I've heard that Stephen King did not like the movie. Well, so far it seems like the movie was better than the book, but the book's pretty good. And I think that maybe in the past several decades, I'd like to think that maybe Stephen King learned to appreciate the Kubrick movie. I don't know if the movie is better than the book or whatever, but we know, I certainly think that Stanley Kubrick is a more respected artist than Stephen King. That said, I'm enjoying The Shining. It is, of course, The Shining means slightly different things here. Danny is the young boy. Wendy and Jack are the parents, who in the book are both blonde. Um, though I cannot help but see the stars of the movie in the book because I saw the movie first. That said, so the in the book the boy is named Danny and he has the shining and he is able to see and perceive the moods well beyond what normal people can. He's able to hear the um, thoughts of most people when they're close by. So he hears his dad's thoughts unless his dad's really blocking him either consciously or through his own garbledness. He's able to read Wendy pretty easily, his mom. He knows things. Sometimes he knows things without understanding what they mean. At one point, when they first arrive at the Overlook Hotel, which is where they're staying, the basic premise, of course, if you haven't seen the movie or read the book somehow, is that Jack Torrance is the name. He is given the job of taking care of the Overlook Hotel in the Rocky Mountains over the winter and of course being in the mountains over the winter they're isolated. There's so much snow there's no way to get in and out. And the phone lines usually get knocked down, so all they have left is a CB radio and a snowmobile, which during the process of Jack going crazy he destroys. So they're truly isolated because of the voices in his head and stuff like that, and his own mixed emotions. Because Jack is a messed up dude, even without ghosts. Because he's kind of he's a messed up dude. He's an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic. He's doing his best and he hasn't drunk in a long time, and that's good. But now that he's up at the hotel, the symptoms of his alcoholism are returning, even without the drink. We know that he's not drinking because they removed it all from the Overlook Hotel for the purpose of him. Anyway, so Danny is so one of the things when they arrive, just as everyone's leaving the hotel for him to take over, and so he overhears. Danny overhears a woman, an old woman who's looking at a younger man, and she thinks to himself, "I'd like to get in his pants." And Danny, who's like 5, doesn't understand what that means, and he asks the other guy, whose name I don't remember, who recognizes him as Shining, and says, "What does it mean that she wants to get in his pants?" And he just starts laughing. Oh! Anyway, the other guy that recognizes him as Shining gives him some advice, such as, and he sort of takes him aside and says, "Look, you've got the Shining. It's a special thing, but it's a bit of a curse too, because especially up here, things are scary. You sure you don't want to leave with me? I'm going to Florida. You come with me to Florida." And of course he says no, because he's got to stay with his parents. But he's like, "Yeah, okay." So he's just like, "Okay, you might see things, but I don't think they can hurt you." He's not 100% sure, which freaks out both of them, because they're going to be isolated. Anyway, so one of the other things that Danny over here notices a lot is that his parents keep talking about the word divorce. He doesn't quite understand what it means, but he knows it's not good. At some point before Jack gave up drinking, Jack is a writer, and he had been working on some stuff, and Danny had spilled water or something on his writing papers and ruined it, and Jack was so mad that he grabbed his arm and actually broke his arm, because he was like a 3-year-old kid and he broke his arm really easily, which made Jack feel terrible. Wendy made Wendy very worried, and of course Danny has all sorts of mixed feelings about that, because he loves his daddy but doesn't like that. Danny, for a while, has an invisible friend who had been really nice to him, but then, as the job of um, the Overlook job started approaching, Tony, the invisible friend, started being more weird and stuff. And eventually, by the time they got really isolated up and the winter kicked in, Tony was gone. But Danny and Jack both keep hearing voices and stuff like that. Dick Halloran is the guy that recognized him as The Shining, and he was like, "I've got to go, sorry." And Dick Halloran is really worried about Danny for obvious reasons. But what can he do? Um, anyway, the background for Jack is that. So we could say that Jack is an abusive husband. We could say he's an abusive dad. And guess what? He had an abusive dad himself. Oh, ho, 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 who knew? So that's the good old cycle of violence that we have learned to appreciate over the years. When the snow finally comes, which truly isolates them, um, Jack has some dreams about his dad, an argument we had with the dream, and an enhanced dream that mixes memories of the past with the current events, and he gets in a big fight with his dad, and when he finally wakes up, he has smashed a CB radio. Oops, oopsie poopsie, because the ghosts and stuff or whatever are all out to get, to make sure that everything goes wrong, and they are succeeding quite well. So they have no radio, no phone. Then later on, but the thing about Jack is that he has these spells and he freaks out and stuff, and then later he regrets it. So he's just this guy. That's why this book has much more compassion for the characters because, well, obviously Danny and Wendy are going to be compassionate for, but Jack, who's just menacing in the movie, you actually see into him, and he's filled with his own fears and anxieties, and he's scared of his own dad, even just the ghost of his dad, and he has regrets when he does stupid stuff. He feels bad about it later, and then he's like, why can't I keep my own promises? And he's really mad about that and stuff like that. Anyway, so at one point, since Danny goes into room 217, even though he's told not to, and has this hallucination with the old lady in the bathtub, and he ends up getting sort of strangled by a ghost or something, which still has purple marks showing around his neck later. Wendy convinces that Jack, when he's saying that we really should get off the mountain, your job be damned. And after a while, she's like, don't we have a snowmobile? He's like, yes, you're right. And so he goes down to the garage and finds a snowmobile, and he's like, where's the battery? And he's like, oh, can't find the battery. Oh, well, I guess we can't go, because the voice in the back of his head is partly the ghosts are telling him, no, you don't, of course you want to go, but you don't really want to go, do you? You really do want to stay, don't you? And so he finally finds the battery, and he's like, crap, they're all against me. I found the battery. And so he takes I think some part of the mechanism, the battery mechanism, or some part of the engine, and grabs it and throws it into as far as he can, deep into the snow, so they won't find it until spring. So now they really, really have no way to get out or contact anybody. Super freaking duper! So things of course, get worse. And before the snow first came, Jack had realized that he had to do one of his many, many tasks, as well as weatherizing and winterizing windows and stuff like that from storms. It was his job to use the chainsaw to carve some of the bushes that are animal shaped. So he goes to carve the animal shapes, because they're kind of getting a little raggedy. So he carves them and shapes them. But when he has that, and it's in broad daylight, he starts hallucinating. He'll look away and come back, and they've changed and they've moved. He looks away and comes back, and they've gotten closer to them. And some of them are lions and dogs, and he looks again, and they're even closer. So he freaks out, and he scrambles away and gets better. And then, after the snow falls, Danny takes a walk in his snowshoes to that same area and has a similar hallucination and scrambles back in his snowshoes and has a very terrible time with that. And that is when the three of them have a big talk again. This is after he's gotten rid of this snowmobile, and he actually tells them what happened, and which is pretty weird. And Jack at one point says, "Look out the window. You see how those are all stationary?" And Wendy's like, "Lee, what are you interrogating? Lay off. He's just had a traumatic experience." And he's like, "I'm just trying to show him that there's a difference in reality and hallucination and the real world." But then Danny says, having The Shining, he's like, "But Daddy, you know it's true because you saw the same thing." So that causes more conflict for good old Jack, don't you know? I can't help but hear Jack Nicholson's voice during all of this. It's really hard not to. Boop. So I had to change cameras because the other one, I guess, ran out of disk space. So I just wanted to say The Shining is an interesting book. Different from the movie. Quite different. I like it for its own sake. I would complain about the use of product placement, which is not product placement for profit, but just to make it more interesting, which is Stephen King's thing, where he said, instead of saying something like oil change, he says Jiffy Lube oil change because he thinks that readers will relate to it better. I think that's nonsense, and it's just fine. You can just say oil change and we will understand it well enough. That being really my one complaint. The other thing is it's kind of a sad book. It is more sad than scary, though it does get scarier as we go along. If you can't do, review.
What you gonna do when the satellites drop, when the satellites drop, when